The glass door swung open so hard it nearly cracked against the marble frame, and the entire lobby of the Meridian Grand Hotel went quiet for exactly 3 seconds before everyone remembered they were supposed to be looking somewhere else. The man who walked in was the kind of man who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around him. His name was Warren Ashby. He was 47, the sort of 47 that came from expensive gyms and quarterly vacations in places that didn't have Wi-Fi unless you paid for the premium suite. He owned 3 commercial real estate companies and 1 minor hockey team, and he wore that ownership the way some people wore cologne. You noticed it before you noticed anything else about him. He crossed the lobby without stopping. His assistant, a young man named Donnie, who had not yet learned to eat lunch before noon, trailed 3 steps behind, with a carry-on that wasn't his, and a schedule that was already 12 minutes behind. Warren didn't look at the elevator button. He just stood in front of it and waited for Donnie to press it. The elevator doors opened and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a gray hoodie, the kind you buy at an airport gift shop when your luggage gets lost. Dark jeans, worn at one knee. Sneakers that had seen better days, or at least better weather. She was carrying a canvas tote bag that had the logo of a Sudbury Public Library on the side. She stepped to the right immediately, the way people do when they've spent a lot of time in navigating spaces that weren't built for them. Warren stepped left. They nearly collided. The coffee cup in his hand, a double espresso in a paper cup he'd picked up from the lobby cafe, without saying thank you to the woman who'd handed it to him, tilted. A small dark circle spread across the front of his shirt. He looked down. He looked at the woman. "Watch where you're going," he said. She said, "I'm sorry," not because she had done anything wrong. She said it the way people say it when they want the situation to be over. Warren looked at the stain on his shirt. He looked at the tote bag. He looked at the hoodie. He made a decision about her in the time it takes most people to blink. "Is there a reason you're in this hotel?" he asked. The lobby was quiet again. The man at the front desk looked up. The woman arranging flowers near the entrance slowed her hands. 2 guests waiting on a sofa near the window found something very interesting to look at on their phones. The woman in the hoodie looked at Warren Ashby with an expression that was very calm and very still. "I have a reservation," she said. "In this hotel." "Yes." Warren made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Right," he said. He turned to Donnie. "Call the front desk and have them verify." He said it loud enough that it wasn't a private instruction. It was a performance. He wanted the lobby to hear it. He wanted her to hear it. The woman in the hoodie didn't move. She didn't flush or flinch or reach into her bag to find her confirmation email the way he expected her to. She just stood there with her canvas tote from Sudbury and her airport gift shop hoodie and looked at him with that same still expression. Donnie had already taken out his phone, then stopped. He was looking at something. He was looking at the plaque on the far wall of the lobby. The Meridian Grand had one of those discreet commemorative plaques near the entrance to the business center, the kind that wealthy hotels put up to quietly signal their own importance. This one read, "Principal Benefactor and Founding Partner, Nneka Walsh-Abioye Walsh, 2019. Donnie had seen that name before. He had seen it on the Forbes list. He had seen it in a profile in the Logic 2 years ago. He had seen it on the building his company used for its servers, because Warren's real estate group leased space in a data center that this woman's company owned. He had also just seen it on the small keycard in the woman's hand, which had the hotel's signature Meridian crest on one side and the gold stripe that meant the top floor suite on the other. "Mr. Ashby," Donnie said, very quietly. Warren was still looking at the woman in the hoodie. "I'm not done." "Sir," Donnie said. His voice had changed. It had the careful, high-wire quality of someone who can see what's coming and can't decide whether to warn the person walking toward it or simply get out of the way. "Do you know who this is?" Warren turned to look at him. Donnie was staring at the plaque. The silence in the lobby was different now. Her name was Nneka Walsh-Abioye Walsh, and she had arrived in Toronto on a flight from Vancouver at 6 that morning, which was 3 hours later than she'd planned because her original flight had been cancelled. and she'd spent the night in the airport, in the blue plastic chairs near Gate C, that no one has ever found comfortable in the history of commercial aviation. She had been offered the airline's premium hotel voucher. She had declined. She had been too tired and too done with being handled. She grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, in a house on the east side where the kitchen window looked out onto a parking lot, and the radiators knocked all winter, and her mother worked 2 jobs until Nneka was 12, and then worked one very good nut job while she was 15, which is when Nneka started working too. Not because she had to, because she couldn't watch her mother carry that much alone. She was good at math the way some people are good at breathing, without thinking about it, without being taught to love it, just naturally and completely. She was better at seeing patterns. She could look at a system, any system, a school cafeteria line, a bus route, a supply chain, and immediately understand where it was wasting time and why. Her high school guidance counselor told her she should consider accounting. She considered accounting for about 4 minutes and then applied to Waterloo for computer science. She graduated in 3 years. She built her first company in the basement of a house she shared with 6 other people on Herb Street West, back when Herb Street didn't have a single coffee shop with exposed brick and a chalkboard menu. She sold that company for more money than her mother had made in the previous decade, and immediately started a second one. Then a third. The third one was the one that changed things. It was a logistics optimization platform that the largest retail supply chains in the country now couldn't function without, and she had built it in the 2 years after her first marriage ended, working on 14-hour days in an office above a Vietnamese restaurant in Scarborough, smelling of pho and solitude. She was worth, according to the most, $40 million. Somewhere in the range of $840 million. She didn't talk about the number. She found the number beside the point. What mattered was what the company did, what it employed, what it built. She had come to Toronto for a board meeting, and then a meeting after the board meeting, and then a quiet dinner with a friend from university who was going through a difficult year and needed someone to sit across from her at a restaurant and be present in the particular way that Nneka had always been present. Fully, without looking at her phone, without filling silences that didn't need to be filled. She had checked into the Meridian Grand because the board meeting was there. She had worn the hoodie because she'd been awake since 3 in the morning, and she was cold, and she owned the company that made the fabric it was made from, technically, through a manufacturing partnership that no one would think to trace back to her because that was the kind of detail she genuinely never thought about. She was tired. She wanted to get to the suite and take off her shoes and eat something that wasn't a granola bar from a vending machine. And then the elevator doors had opened, and a man had spilled coffee on himself and decided it was her fault. She had said she was sorry. She always said she was sorry first, not because she believed she had wronged him, but because she had learned, a long time ago, that the fastest way out of a small injustice was to give the person committing it what they expected, which was her apology and her retreat. She had learned this and she had made peace with it, and she had also never entirely made peace with it, which is the particular exhaustion that no balance sheet can account for. Warren Ashby was still looking at the plaque, then at Donnie, then back at the plaque. "Abia Walsh," he said slowly. "The benefactor," Donnie said. "The data center. The Meridian's primary commercial partner. She owns," he stopped. "She owns a significant stake in the building, sir." Warren turned back to look at the woman in the hoodie. Nneka was already pressing the elevator button herself. "Wait," Warren said. His voice had changed. It had lost its shape, the same way a shirt loses its collar when you leave it in the rain. She looked at him. "I didn't. I wasn't aware." He stopped. Started again. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't," she said, pleasantly. "The way you might tell someone the weather." The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. Warren stepped forward. "Mrs. Abioye Walsh." "It's Walsh-Abioye," she said. "I changed the order about 3 years ago. You'd know that if you'd done any research before asking me to prove I had a reservation." The elevator doors closed. She did not think about Warren Ashby for the rest of the morning. She took off her shoes. She ordered oatmeal from room service and ate it at the desk while reviewing the board package she'd already read twice on the plane. She called her daughter. She did not call anyone to report what had happened in the lobby because there was nothing to report. It was not unusual. It was Tuesday in a nice hotel with a man who had made a decision about her based on a canvas tote bag and a worn knee in her jeans. She had lost count, a long time ago, of how many Tuesdays she'd had like this. The board meeting was on the 14th floor. She arrived at 9:52. She was the last one in the room, which she always was, not because she was disorganized, but because she had discovered years ago that arriving last gave her 60 seconds in a room where everyone had already settled in, which meant she could see immediately where the tension was and who was aligned with whom before anyone started talking. It was the same skill that made her good at systems. Look at the pattern before you The room was a long table with 11 chairs and a window that looked out over the lake, which was flat and silver gray the way Lake Ontario gets in October when the tourist boats have stopped running. There was a woman from their Vancouver office who'd been arguing with a man from their Montreal partner group for what looked like it had been a 20-minute argument that was pretending to be a preliminary discussion. There was a lawyer named Sylvester Park who was already looking at his phone under the table, which meant he already knew the answer to whatever question was going to take the next 40 minutes. There was her co-founder, Bia Alawol, who looked up when Nneka walked in and gave her the very small nod that meant, "It's going to be fine, but it's going to take a while to get there." There was also Warren Ashby, seated 4 chairs down on the right side of the table, because his commercial real estate group was a co-investor in the hospitality division that was on the agenda today, and because the universe sometimes has the kind of sense of humor that isn't particularly funny. He saw her walk in. She saw him see her. She sat down at the head of the table, opened the board package, and said, "Good morning, everyone. Let's start with item 3, because I think items 1 and 2 are going to resolve themselves once we've looked at the underlying numbers." She did not look at Warren Ashby when she said it. She didn't need to. The meeting lasted until 1. By 10:30, it was clear to everyone in the room that Nneka Walsh-Abioye had read not just the board package, but the 3 supplementary reports that had been distributed the previous Friday, the partner group's Q3 projections, and a market analysis that Sylvester Park had commissioned but hadn't circulated yet. She didn't say she had read all of this. She just asked questions that were impossible to answer without having read all of this, which meant that the people who hadn't read it were left with the particular discomfort of trying to look like they had. She was not unkind about it. She didn't perform expertise. She just moved through the material the way she moved through every room, with a kind of quiet, complete attention that made you feel, if you were paying her that attention in return, that you were probably in the right hands. Warren Ashby said very little. He had a habit, she had noticed, of speaking when he wanted to reorder the room, and the room today did not reorder itself around him. He tried once at 11:15, when there was a pause in the discussion about site development timelines. And he said, "I think the more pressing issue is the Q4 capital exposure," in the tone of someone resetting a conversation that had veered off course. Nneka had looked at him across the table and said, "We'll get to Q4 capital in item 7. Right now I want to understand what happened with the Brampton projections, because the variance there is telling us something." The variance was telling them something. She walked the room through it for 12 minutes without notes. At the end of those 12 minutes, even the man from Montreal, who had come in with a position and held on to it like a railing in a strong wind, said, "Okay, yes, that changes the picture." At 12:45, Warren Ashby asked for 5 minutes at the end of the agenda. Everyone looked at him. There were 3 items still to cover. Nneka said, "We're going to finish the agenda first." They finished at 1:03. Bia was already gathering her notes. Sylvester Park had his phone out above the table now, which meant he felt the meeting had officially ended. The Vancouver and Montreal contingents were doing the cautious post-meeting social recalibration of people who'd been at odds for 90 minutes and now had to share a buffet. Warren stayed in his chair. Nneka stayed in hers. The room emptied until it was just the two of them in the silver-gray lake and the ghost of this morning in the lobby, which neither of them had mentioned. "I'd like to apologize," Warren said. Nneka looked at him. "This morning." He paused. "I didn't know who you were." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "I know." Something shifted in the room. It was not the shift Warren had been expecting. He had been expecting either a gracious acceptance or a formal censure. The two outcomes that men like him generally prepared for, because those were the two outcomes they'd encountered most often in boardrooms and lobbies and uncomfortable conversations. He had not prepared for what she actually did, which was to let the words sit there and look at him with an expression that was clear and patient and not particularly interested in making him feel better. "That's the part I want you to think about," she said. "Not who I am, the fact that it mattered to you. That who I was changed how you spoke to me." Warren opened his mouth. "Because I want you to understand something." She was not raising her voice. She never raised her voice. Her voice was the same voice it had been at 6 in the morning, with a coffee stain between them, and at 10 in a boardroom full of people with significant interests at stake. It did not change. "If I had been exactly who you thought I was, some woman in a hoodie with a library bag who had no business being in your lobby, the right thing to do would have been the same. You understand that?" Warren Ashby was a smart man. This was one of the things about him that made the other things worse. He was smart enough to understand exactly what she'd said. He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Good." She picked up her board package. She stood. "I accepted the apology," she said. "That's not the same as it being sufficient, but I'm not in the business of deciding sufficient. That's yours to work out." She left him the lake and the quiet. It became a story because these things always become stories, and because the hotel had a lobby, and the lobby had people in it. And people in lobbies have phones. She didn't find out until her dinner with her friend Abina. Not her friend from the file, a different Abina, who had grown up 2 streets over from her in Hamilton and was now a pediatric oncologist in Ottawa, who was going through a painful divorce and needed soup and honesty in equal measure. They were at a small Italian place near King Street that didn't take reservations but always had a table for Abina, because Abina had once diagnosed the owner's nephew with something the 3 other doctors hadn't caught, and some debts get paid in pasta. Abina showed her the phone. There was a video. 43 seconds, shot from behind a large floral arrangement near the entrance to the business center. The quality was not good, but the audio was clear enough. Warren saying, "Is there a reason you're in this hotel?" And then the stillness. And then "I have a reservation." And then the silence after, in which the lobby rearranged itself around the fact of who she was. The video had 400,000 views. "Oh," Nneka said. "You didn't know? I've been in meetings." Abina looked at her. "There's a piece in the Globe." "Of course there is. And someone on Twitter." "I know Abina," compared Warren Ashby to. "Can we please talk about your divorce?" Nneka said. Not unkindly. Just with the particular emphasis of a woman who had come to this dinner for her friend, not for herself. Abina put her phone away. She looked at Nneka for a long moment with the physician's eye that saw past the surface of things. "Are you okay?" she asked. Not in the casual way. In the real way, Nneka considered the question. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm always tired after these things. Not because of what happened, because of how many times I've had to have the same kind of Tuesday and then explain to someone why it was worth being tired about." Abina reached across the table and put her hand over her friend's. They ate soup. They talked about the divorce, which was complicated and painful in the way that only a divorce from someone you still partly love can be. Nneka ordered a second glass of wine, which she almost never did. They stayed until the owner came over to offer them dessert on the house, which they both accepted because there is no good reason to refuse tiramisu on a Tuesday in October, when the lake is gray. and you have been tired for a long time. Warren Ashby issued a public statement 2 days later. His communications team had clearly worked on it. It was well-structured and appropriately contrite, with the kind of language that suggested he'd been advised by someone who understood the difference between a statement that addresses the harm and a statement that manages the optics of the harm. It hit most of the right notes. It also, inevitably, focused primarily on the fact of who she was. It apologized for failing to recognize her. It called her an extraordinary entrepreneur and a foundational figure in Canadian business. It did not say, "I should not have spoken to her that way, regardless of who she was." His commercial real estate group's investor, meeting the following Thursday, had a slightly different attendance list than planned. The hospitality division partnership was restructured over the following quarter, in the way that these things get restructured when the trust architecture changes, slowly and with lawyers and without anyone announcing it publicly. Nneka did not make a statement. Her communications director asked her 3 times and she said, 3 times, no. Not because there was nothing to say, because she had said it already, in the only room that mattered, to the only person who needed to hear it. The video ran for 2 weeks on the kind of loop that social media creates around moments like this one. A woman standing still in a lobby while a man performed certainty about who she was. People watched it and saw different things in it. Some people saw it as a story about exposure, about the satisfying collision of assumption and consequence. Some people, many of them women who had spent their careers in rooms that were not built for them, saw something quieter in it. They saw the way she said, "I have a reservation," not loudly, not with performance. Just as a fact, delivered to someone who needed to hear it as a fact rather than as a challenge. One comment, which got shared more than most, said, "What gets me is she never looked like she needed him to understand. She already knew what was true. She was just waiting for him to catch up." Nneka saw the comment on her phone one morning, in the kitchen of her house in Westdale, back in Hamilton, where she still lived within 12 minutes of the house, where the kitchen window looked out onto a parking lot. She read it twice. Then she put her phone face down on the counter and finished her coffee. Her daughter, who was 17 and had the particular radar of a teenage girl who noticed when her mother was thinking about something, came into the kitchen and said, "You're doing the face? What face?" "The one where you're thinking about something and pretending you're not." Nneka looked at her daughter. Her daughter had her grandmother's eyes and her father's jaw, and her own very complete sense of herself, which Nneka considered her greatest success, above all the companies and the platforms and the deals and the plaques in hotel lobbies. "Someone on the internet said something thoughtful," Nneka said. "About the lobby thing?" "Yes." Her daughter poured cereal. "Did they understand it?" "Mostly." "What did they miss?" Nneka thought about it. About the lobby. About the boardroom. About the years before both of those rooms, when she had been the woman who said sorry first and retreated fastest, and made herself small in every space that hadn't been built to hold her, and how she had slowly, imperfectly, at considerable cost, stopped doing that. Not because she'd reached a particular net worth or a particular address on a Forbes list, but because she had decided, one unremarkable Tuesday in her own life, that she was going to take up the space she occupied without apology, and that this decision would have to be made again and again every time a man in a nice lobby decided, in the time it takes to blink, who she was. "They missed the part about how long it took," she said. Her daughter chewed her cereal and considered this, the way she considered most things her mother said, seriously, without rushing toward a response. "How long did it take?" Nneka looked out the window. It was a different view now. Not a parking lot, but a maple tree that had gone completely gold overnight, the way they do in October in Hamilton, when the temperature drops and everything that was green becomes briefly completely itself. "Views long enough," she said, "and worth it."